This is an updated guide for my Lightning Ranger Deadeye starter build, and I started this build with a specific direction in mind, folks, but as I've learned more about the mechanics of the game, things have drastically changed, so I wanted to update the guide and inform you folks of the direction that I've taken and hopefully help you out. The build absolutely crushes Cruel difficulty, and we're about to start the end game, and this build will help those of you trying to branch out from a starter leveling build to something that will get you through Cruel difficulty in its entirety and ready for the entry level of the end game itself. And I'll also be sharing some mistakes and things that I've learnt along the way so you won't make those same errors. I'll be updating this build for mapping and bossing as I progress, so make sure to drop the video a like and sub to the channel to keep informed. I'm also streaming on both YouTube and Twitch, so jump in and feel free to ask any questions. Now, the main difference from the starter setup in the previous video is that we've moved fully away from using chain and pierce on Lightning Arrow, and I'll explain a little bit more about that later and why. And we're going to also, once we hit level 52, start using magnetic salvo, which is absolutely game-changing, folks. This is a premier boss killer and pack clearing skill that just absolutely claps. In terms of the skills, there's three choices here that are our primary DPS output, and the first one of those is Lightning Arrow. At the moment, mine's sitting at 3,171 DPS, absolutely stellar for where I'm at the game. I'll break down my gear choices and show you how I've got to this point in a moment. The skill itself, you know how this works, folks. You fire it into groups of enemies, and on hitting an enemy or a wall, the arrow will chain lightning beams at near enemies. Use Lightning Infusion, which gives 25% extra lightning damage. I've used Primal Armament, which gives us 25% more weapon elemental damage, and I've also used Martial Tempo to give us 25% more attack speed. So just stacking more raw damage output stats on this will benefit you further than using the previous pierce and chain setup. I will say really quickly, there is a point when you're leveling where pierce and chain are effective at the beginning of the game when you're starting out, but there becomes a point where it tips over once you get the third slot, for example, and you start unlocking these sorts of gems that I've just outlined. You want to be getting these as soon as possible to up your damage as much as possible. This synergizes superbly with Lightning Rod, so you fire arrows from the sky and they land on the floor creating a lightning burst, and they remain on the ground, and any chaining lightning beams can chain to it. So this is why Lightning Arrow does chain to lightning rods. That's how the setup works. And in terms of the support gems for this one, we've got Scatter Shot, so that gives us 20% less damage, but it makes an additional 2 projectiles land. It just makes it easier to set up those AoEs that we're trying to get off for Magnetic Salvo. More on that in a moment. And then Magnified Effect. Supported skills have 40% more area of effect. Really good for just covering more area, obviously. And then finally, Electrocute, so lightning damage from supported skills contributes to electrocution build-up. This just helps us get that effect off as soon as possible as well. The supported skills deal 40% less damage. I actually think this is worth it. You might disagree. Sound off in the comments below and let me know what you think there, folks. Magnetic Salvo is the star of the show, though, folks. The way this skill works is you aim skyward and fire energy missiles at lingering arrows or bolts created by other lightning attacks. That means lightning rods, electrocuting arrow, for example, that remain on the battlefield. It fires at them and the missiles explode if they land close to those arrows, dealing more damage in a larger area and destroying those arrows. So the explosion does 186% attack damage. The way it works is it'll hit as many of them as it can. So you just get an absolutely humongous detonation of lightning in front of you. It looks glorious and it does insane damage. I've socketed this with Hourglass, so supported skills deal 40% more damage. It has a longer cooldown, but I think this is worth it given how much the mana costs to use this. You can't really spam it the point I'm at the moment, folks. And also lightning penetration, so this skill penetrates enemies' lightning resistance by 30%, so it's just dropping the resistance to lightning even more, making them even more susceptible to getting absolutely clapped. We also use Stormcaller Arrow. This embeds an arrow where it lands for a short duration. At the end of the duration, a lightning bolt strikes down with a high chance chance to shock. I've socketed this with lightning exposure. This basically means that when you shock an enemy, it inflicts a 20% debuff to their resistance to lightning. So that's really nice if you're using it on packs and bosses. If you get the shock off with this, it will actually lower their resistance even more. We're just trying to push Stormcaller Arrow to get those shocks off as much as possible. If you can initiate the shock with this, you are laughing. It won't always work out, but it's just a good tool to have there. I'll go over defensive skills in a moment. Electrocuting Arrow. So this is great. Basically, the way to use this is get this in on rare mobs and on bosses, and what this does is it allows you to start building up shock. Okay, it allows you to actually stun them. So you'll see me doing that a lot when I play this build. I try and get the shocks off as much as possible. It's just another layer of CC, and I've also put persistence for more skill duration, so that just gives us more time to build that shock up without the arrow disappearing, because that can get quite annoying. And also acceleration, more projectile speed. I'm not really sure that's min-maxed. Someone could probably suggest a better choice in that slot for me. Feel free to. Voltaic Mark marks an enemy, and if you kill that enemy when they are marked, they will explode in a lightning nova. It does massive damage. In terms of the support gems, I've used lasting shock, so support skills have 100% increased shock duration but less chance to shock, just because if you get it off, it's just so good when it lasts that long. So I think that's probably the way to go with this. Again, if you disagree, sound off in the comments below. Coursing Current on top of that. Shocking hits from supported skills also have a 50% chance to shock enemies in a 2.5 meter radius. So when it goes off, we've also got the AoE shock going on there as well. Really, really nice. And of course, Herald of Thunder, which is a passive buff. This essentially just slams down lightning when it's active. When you kill a shocked enemy from an attack, it will cause subsequent attacks to release lightning bolts which deal attack damage to surrounding enemies. So that's what you can see flying out the sky sometimes when I'm playing. Absolutely amazing. When you get everything synergized and singing together, it's so powerful. And then you can see here that the buff, the lightning strikes the targets of your next 3 attacks after killing a shocked enemy. So it's just really effective at adding to that clear speed. I've got this one socketed with Culling Strike and Execute. So Execute's very straightforward. Supported skills deal 40% more damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. So low life is counted as 35%. Often this will hit towards the end of a fight as well, so you'll end up just deleting things that are on 35% health. It's pretty nice. And then also Culling Strike. Now, if you don't know what Culling Strike does, in this particular instance, it only works against rare or unique enemies, and you'll see here in the tooltip, it says here that rare enemies are killed at 10% health and unique enemies are killed at 5% health. This just comes in incredibly clutch so often, particularly in boss fights, folks. In terms of survivability, we're using Wind Dancer, which is activated. It takes 30 spirit, really important to use in my opinion. What this does is it ramps up into 3 stages. Every 1.4 seconds a stage is added. Each stage gives us 18% more evasion rating, and when you are hit by a melee attack, this consumes all the stages and triggers Gale Force. Now, Gale Force essentially just knocks enemies back on hit and gives a critical hit chance plus 5% for a moment, but if you socket this with things like Blind, 100% chance to blind enemy, so that's an instant 20% less accuracy rating and evasion rating on that enemy. With your massive evasion rating, enemies are going to struggle to hit you, which is great. So I'm just going to play a little bit and show you how this build works in Act 3. It'll hopefully show you the survivability. It'll show you just how it works moment to moment. It'll also present a few little issues with the build. You'll notice that at the moment, it's just mana for me, and that's down to my gearing choices. I'm used to just using pots, but hopefully you'll see that it just melts stuff. I'm going to keep moving around. Let's use a salvo. Deletes that. Firing lightning arrow in there. An incredible speed, and we'll go over the gear and explain why. But even the survivability is great. And it's just making mincemeat of everything. Oh, we've got a boss. Let's see if we can do something about this. It's chunking his health. What you've got to bear in mind as well, folks, is this is not min-maxed. At the moment, all I am doing is using, I think it's level 14. He's shocked again. Gonna use my mana pot. Still not been hit. Just such good damage. Just hit me there. Don't get hit. You've got to keep on top of the pots. That's the only problem with this build, and I'll be completely honest, that's an oversight. He's shocked again. Look at that. Whoa, we nearly got cocky there.
Thunderous shot.
Yikes. See, the mana catching me out a little bit there. You've just got to keep on top of it. That's the only thing I would say, folks. The mana isn't great. With Tailwind and Wind Dancer up, 83% evasion chance with 6,477 evasion rating. Now, in terms of the passive tree, I'm going to try and keep this as short and sweet as I can because I know how detailed you can go with this. But long story short, folks, had to do quite a lot of respecking, and there's a few learning points here contained. So please do listen, especially if you're a new player. The biggest mistake I made was I got too excited at about, I'd say, probably just after I'd made that guide around level 40, and I just started glass cannoning. I started dumping things into lightning, damage, and I started to suffer. So I had to do quite a bit of respecking and spend quite a lot of money. So my number one advice to you is get evasion nodes as soon as possible and just get them out of the way. Obviously keep a little bit of balance there, but I'll show you the key areas that I've picked evasion up from. Here, these 6 nodes are really good. 30%, 15%, so it's 60 there, 60 there. You can also get some really nice evasion from down here. 15%, 15%, 15%. And these 2 nodes are interesting. They kind of counterbalance each other. You can either have one where it's 30% reduced evasion rating if you've been hit recently. Recently means 4 seconds. And 100% increased evasion rating if you haven't been hit recently. Now, these are the inverse of each other. I've took both of them, so that's just going to give you a flat 70% increase there as well, which is really tasty. And then, of course, you can also grab evasion rating from around here at the beginning of the tree, and that's everything I've stacked evasion wise. I just really thought it was important to get that across as soon as possible because you don't want to end up in the situation I've been in. I hit a brick wall at the end of Act 2 Cruel, and it was very frustrating because of that. So get your evasion nodes as quick as you can. The other key areas that I have been working around are this little area of elemental resistance damage and whatnot here. So we've just got a lot of elemental damage attacks. We've got one here that increases the chance to shock and electrocute build up. We've got Forces of Nature, which penetrate enemy elemental resistances, and then we move down to here, which is all lightning resistance, penetration, and chances to shock. There is a really good node in this tree though, folks, right here. Lightning damage with non-critical hits is lucky. So a non-critical hit becomes lucky. Lucky means things are rolled twice and the better result is used. So in these games, the game calculates through rolls what it's going to do in terms of damage. So let me explain this as quickly as I can to try and make it make sense. If you look at this bow, you will see that the lightning damage is 2 to 40. Now, what you will also notice is if you look at other elemental rolls, the lightning is often the one with the most extreme kind of variance, the lowest to highest. That can screw you over a little bit. So what this does is when it rolls it twice, it will pick the highest number. So that's just something very nice to have. In terms of other lightning nodes, I've picked up some lightning nodes here just to get damage against electrocuted enemies. Sorry, increase electrocute build-up against shocked enemies. Loads of other electrocute and lightning damage nodes here. I've also done the same here. Just more elemental damage and shock, and also damage penetrating lightning resistance is really, really important. Really helps. This node is really important. Increased damage of 15% for each type of elemental ailment on an enemy. You want to try and get as many different types of damage on an enemy as possible. That's why, and we'll talk about the gear in a moment, that's why having a quiver here that's adding fire damage, cold damage, lightning damage. That's why having a quiver that also has chance to poison on attack. That's why having a skill gem that envenoms on my basic shot is really effective because it effectively allows you to stack those 15% when you're damaging a boss or a tough enemy. Really, really important, folks. Do not miss this. Another one that's very, very good is this quiver section here. So 10% increased bonus damage gain from equipped quiver, 10% bonus damage gain from equipped quiver, 30%, 15%, 15%. That totals 10, 20, 50, and 80% increase to our bonuses from an equipped quiver. If we look here, I've got attack speed at 11% there. I've got a load of flat lightning damage and a load of flat elemental damage, a load of flat critical bonus damage for attack damage, dexterity, etc. This is all included in that increase. It's such a strong set of nodes to use. I fully recommend that you use this, folks. It will just make your damage skyrocket. In terms of what I've messed around with, I was struggling with bosses in Act 2. So what I actually did was I went down here to this area here where we can get attack damage against rare and unique enemies increased. So 16% against rare or unique, 16% against rare or uniques, 4% and 25%. And a load of other great stuff there. I spec'd off this because I wanted to get my survivability up for this video. The first thing I will be doing once I've got my extra levels, I'm currently at level 60, I will be going straight back down here before anything else, because I would like this to be active when I start mapping. I will probably consider removing the crit hit chances and the node there, maybe to get there a little bit quicker. And in other plans, I'm torn between either going along here to get some more elemental damage or going down this way, and there's some nice ones here, man. 25% increased attack damage here. Or if you wanted to go the survivability route, you can go up here and grab these nodes. 100% increased evasion rating from your body armor. The choice is yours, folks. This game is so deep and there's so many ways you can go, but they are the areas that I'm going. This class is level 60. I think I've got all of the passive skill quest completed, and this is what you end up with. So I would fully recommend this as a starting place, and then you can make the decisions yourself. We're going to move on to the gear now, and that will hopefully explain a little reasoning around why I've made the choices I have, because defenses and resistances are so important. Let's go there now. In terms of the gear, let's jump straight into everyone's favorite part, the weapon. So I've got pretty tasty bow here. It's got lightning damage rolled onto it through its sockets, and it's got flat fizz damage. It's also got percent increase to elemental damage with attacks. It's also got 10% attack speed increase, a bit of dex, and a bit of life per kill. You want to be looking for bows that look like this if you want to go lightning. The only thing that I'm annoyed about is it's unfortunately not on a dual string bow. That's a really good archetype bow because it lets you fire 2 shots. I would also recommend just stacking as much flat lightning damage as possible. If this had have rolled with lightning damage as a prefix as well as putting the 2 sockets in there, we would have been absolutely laughing, folks. Moving on from the bow, we'll go straight into the quiver. So the quiver, again, I've been pretty lucky with this as well. 11% increased attack speed, 14 dex, 18% crit damage bonus for attack damage, 1 to 25 lightning damage, 3 to 6 cold damage, fire damage. Really, really tasty. And that, of course, synergizes brilliantly with the passive that I outlined in the tree, where you get increased effect from your quiver. This just makes such a big difference to damage. Look at the DPS drop when I take that off. It literally, look at the lightning arrow, 1,765, you put it on, 3,171. It has a huge impact on the overall damage that you do. In terms of the other gear now, this is the bit I can't stress enough. If you're a new player, you've got to get your head around this. The gear that you need is mainly max life and resistances. I was really lucky with this. I actually gambled this chest. I got max life, all the 3 reses, and then I also socketed it twice and put the cold and fire res up. So that is just a really good starting point for any build that's going to be going into endgame. It's of course not the highest rolls, but it's a great starting point. I've also been really lucky and got myself this amazing helm. It's tri resistances with max life, a bit of mana, it could have been better, and of course I've socketed with cold resistance. So you're basically just using it as a survivability stick, and this makes such a humongous difference when you get these kinds of drops. The gloves that I've got aren't the best. We've got some flat physical damage, which is great, and some flat fire damage, which is great. A bit of life and some fire and crit. What would have been great on these would have been a little bit of physical mana leech. That's a really good stat because this build does struggle with mana. In terms of the belt, you want to just be getting as much resistance on it as possible. This is okay. It's not great. I'm not going to put an Exile into it or anything. I've got max life and lightning resistance and a bit of strength and a bit of armor. It's fine. It's nothing crazy. But these folks, and this is a massive tip, gamble for boots all the time until you drop these sorts of bad boys. 25% increased movement speed. I believe 30 is the highest. 42 max life. 92 mana. Bit of chaos resistance, and I socketed it with fire res. I did actually slam this with an Exile, and it rolled me the mana, I believe it was. It rolled me the life, so it could have been worse. I was actually fishing for some more resistance, but I was happy with what I've got. It's a great starting point. You obviously want to try and get as many resistances on these as possible as well, but my advice to you is go and gamble for boots, because you will eventually drop something like this, and keep an eye on the vendors, because it makes such a difference to your movement speed when you're running around like a crazy person. My jewelry absolutely sucks. I've got an amulet here that's 6 all attributes, 112 max life, plus 1 projectile skills, and 7% cold resistance. You just want to be getting as much resistance and as much pluses to your life, your mana, your damage, that kind of good stuff. This ring's okay. It gives me increased skill speed, so I'm not going to say no to it, and the mana regen is really welcome. It also converts the cold damage of the build to lightning damage, which is a nice touch, as we're obviously lightning damage, and we've obviously got things like cold res there and cold damage on the quiver and whatnot, so that's really helpful. In terms of rings, and this is another tip from me, have a selection of rings and swap them around based on what your requirements are. At the moment, I'm using this one just for the lightning and the strength, because I can't use the helm until I get more strength. But I've got loads here. I've got ones that give me loads of cold resistance and lightning resistance. I've got ones that give me increased lightning damage and fire resistance. I've been swapping them round. I haven't sold them. Keep hold of them, because there will be situations where certain elements are causing you a problem. At the moment, my resistances aren't great. They're not crazy. We're sitting at 35% fire, 71% lightning, and 44% cold. I'm going to be socketing these gloves, I think, and putting probably either another fire res rune in, or maybe another cold one in. I haven't fully decided yet, but it'd be nice to just have that balanced out a little bit. In terms of the flasks, you just need to make sure you get a flask with as much mana recovery as humanly possible. This one's massive for me and keeps me going without having to worry, as long as I remember to hit the button. But it is so important in this early stage before you can kind of fine-tune your gear and get those mana leech properties going. The only other way that you can really support it other than that is in terms of the skills. I've actually got a Soul Thief gem in my bow shot just so I get a little bit of leech turning into mana for me. And the same goes for your flask. The amount of resistance you have combined with the amount of life and the amount of evasion rating you have with everything that we've discussed in this video, plus that blinding effect, you should always have the opportunity to heal. I've not been one-shotted by a boss for a very long time. I always manage to get the heal off, and as long as you're using those passive skills that I mentioned earlier to up your damage, you should have no problem, folks. Check out this next video. It's got you covered. Take care of yourselves, keep having fun, come check out a stream on YouTube or Twitch, and I'll see you in the next one.